Some time later, the scene shifted to the conference room, where Cain stood before a group of key figures and gave his report. He ended by saying that abnormal activity had been detected in 3 territories based on several eyewitness accounts. A mysterious night order of dozens of unidentified knights had been seen driving out monsters and securing the main roads. Hearing this, Raul's expression grew serious as he thought about how the barony had barely survived after the gate incident by gathering what little strength remained. And now another problem had appeared. He wondered if this was the scheme of another noble house trying to seize control of their weakened territory. Breaking his silence, Raul asked if Cain had determined which knight order they belonged to, but Cain shook his head and explained that there were no crests on their armor or weapons, and when their scout tried to observe them they vanished without a trace. Raul frowned in thought, finding it strange since knights were always proud of their houses and never hid their crests, which meant something was wrong. Cain continued with concern, saying there was no way a barony could independently gather so many knights, so there must be a backer or accomplice. Raul pressed further, asking if any houses or factions had made suspicious moves. Cain replied that Duke Templeton's house and Marquis Greer's house had remained quiet, which was expected since they rarely got involved in politics, but the house of Marie McNeil had acted unusually fast to put down the chaos in their region, with reports saying the Marquis himself had taken direct action, as if they had been prepared beforehand. Raul's gaze darkened as he thought about how House McNeil posed a greater threat than Randall from the kingdom's perspective, since when the Empire invaded, Templeton had led the resistance while McNeil refused to join the alliance and sided with the Empire instead. Thanks to a whistleblower, a catastrophe had been avoided, but a power vacuum had still been left behind. The real question was when the Empire had turned them, and if no contact had been renewed yet, there might still be a chance to sway them back, but if they had recommitted to the Empire, then all ties would have to be severed. Cain then concluded that the most suspicious parties were House McNeil, Count Randall's house and Viscount Jaden, whom Raul himself had mentioned. Raul asked about his uncle, and Cain replied that he had recently returned to the capital and was conspiring with some relatives from his faction, likely connected to the disturbances. Raul thought that the knights near their borders must be linked to one of them and suspected they were planning to move there first, though he wondered if things would really unfold the way they hoped. He then gave a firm order to Philip to keep the knights on high alert and be ready to activate the portal in any emergency, and Philip agreed. Raul told Jake that from then on the guild's direct forces would take over gate management and monster extermination, and the Night Order would no longer handle those tasks. Jake accepted with a confident smile. Raul looked at everyone and reminded them that their enemies were beginning to act because they believed them to be weak prey, but he told them they must prove the cost of underestimating them and show what happened when someone took on more than they could handle. When the meeting ended and the others left, only Bernard remained, and Raul told him in a lower tone that he would be staying in the capital for now, and if something happened at the estate while he could not be reached, Bernard should follow his earlier instructions. Bernard bowed and confirmed that he should take Miss Nikia back to the estate in case of an emergency, and Raul agreed, adding that any orders or requests for cooperation from the estate should be ignored unless they came from Brother Dylan. His face turned grave as he explained that the Empire's collaborator, who was likely still inside the estate, had not yet been identified, and he needed to be prepared for anything, since their true target was probably his father, whose power remained strong, and if he fell, the family would collapse into chaos. He thought this incident might be their chance to root out every hidden enemy within the family. Later that day, Raul arrived at the Turium branch of the First Guild, where Elios, the branch leader, welcomed him warmly. Raul greeted him in return and observed him thoughtfully, remembering how Elios had started as a trainee knight from the Golden Bear Knight Order, one of the 6 who had first followed him, and had now risen to expert rank and become a top guild executive. The Turium branch alone commanded 500 trained guild troops and about 20 stationed knights, managing several dungeons under royal authority while also taking commissions from nobles and citizens. Elios led Raul deeper into the headquarters, where 3 knights greeted him with identical smiles and said together that it had been a long time, and Raul immediately recognized them as his classmates from the academy, who had joined the First Knight Order along with Dalton. All of them were S-class candidates with great talent, and thanks to the guild system they had grown a lot, each nearly reaching mid-expert level. Raul mentioned that he had heard about the discovery of an ancient dungeon and asked for details. A knight with spiky brown hair raised his hand and explained that a wandering adventurer had discovered it, and since it was near one of the dungeons under their control, they secured it quickly. Raul thought to himself that they had finally found an ancient dungeon. In Connect there were 2 kinds of dungeons. The first were improperly sealed gates that fused with their world, constantly spawning monsters and needing special conditions to be closed. The second, much rarer, were natural dungeons that had existed before the gates appeared, such as hidden sanctuaries, mage laboratories, dragon lairs, or places of ancient power, known as ancient dungeons. Unlike normal dungeons, which were gateways to another dimension, ancient dungeons were part of Connect itself and far harder to find. Ken then added that they believed this dungeon was none other than Janak's dungeon, the one whose entrance had vanished 5 years earlier. Raul asked about its current status, and Ken explained that their knights and soldiers were guarding it closely under strict secrecy. Janak's dungeon was always dangerous, and though only the entrance had been partially explored, many relics had been found, but almost everyone who went deeper never returned. The last expedition ended in tragedy when the entrance collapsed after a noble house's team entered, and now the dungeon had reappeared in a completely different place. The red-haired knight then asked Raul if he intended to conquer it, and Raul confirmed that he planned to enter with a small elite team before rivals acted. The knight asked who would go, and Raul, noting their anticipation, apologized and said he had already chosen. He then asked Cain if he believed he had the ability to conquer an ancient dungeon, and Cain with determination said he absolutely wanted to join. Before everyone, Raul declared that among all the knights only Cain would join him. Though a few sighed, the others accepted it, saying that if it was Cain they could not complain, and they congratulated him warmly. As Raul looked at Cain, he reflected that among the 10 in the first Knight Order, Cain was second only to Dalton in skill, and the only one at expert intermediate rank. Though smaller in size, he was lean, quick, and built for speed and precision, with refined mana control that pushed him beyond his limits, making him not just a strong choice but the key to the raid. Raul was already eager to see Cain's performance in the ancient dungeon. Later that day, Raul and Cain sat in a quiet meeting room, and Raul poured him tea before asking if anything about life in the Knight Order made him uncomfortable. Cain answered immediately that with their efficient training and excellent facilities there was no better place to grow. Raul thought it was a textbook answer, reliable and reserved, and recalled that though they both graduated from the same academy, they had not truly known each other until now. He told Cain that if he ever thought improvements were needed he should say so, since the Knight Order was still new and imperfect, and Cain agreed. Raul then leaned forward and revealed that the real reason for their meeting was to ask if Cain knew why he had been chosen for the raid. Cain admitted he did not, and Raul's expression grew serious as he said that before discussing the dungeon there was another matter to address, and then he called Cain by his true name, Lady Kaylee de Greer. Cain froze in shock, wondering how he knew her identity. Raul reflected on the Marquis Greer House, one of the 5 great martial houses of Reuben Kingdom, famous for its spear techniques but weakened after the Great War when they lost both their head and heir along with parts of their guarded techniques. The family withdrew from politics, hoping to restore themselves in seclusion, so it was understandable that a noble daughter would disguise herself as a man to enroll in the academy. With calm resolve, Cain lowered her head and apologized sincerely, saying she never meant to deceive him and would leave the Knight Order immediately if ordered. Raul folded his arms and asked if she intended to step down, but she firmly said no, declaring that whatever happened she would continue as a knight, though she knew bitterly that most Knight Orders in Reuben Kingdom did not even recognize female knights. Raul raised an eyebrow and asked why she spoke as if she was ready to quit, wondering if something in their order had disappointed her, but she quickly denied it and instead asked if he truly meant it when he said she could stay. Raul gave a short laugh and said it was obvious, since no Knight Order would let go of someone who had reached expert intermediate rank as a teenager. Cain hesitated and explained that she was a woman from the House of Greer, which was a rival to the House of Ashton. Raul replied calmly that it did not matter to him, and that he would take full responsibility even if problems arose. Her voice trembled slightly as she asked if her gender and lineage truly did not matter, and Raul met her gaze, telling her that only her will mattered and that she had to prove it through actions. Cain stood up, then knelt before him, declaring that she, Knight Cain of the House of Marquis Greer, pledged her loyalty once again to Viscount Raul Ashton as her master. Raul also rose, stepped forward, placed his hand gently on her head and solemnly accepted her loyalty, vowing to fulfill his duty as her commander. As she knelt, Raul thought that he had finally found the very talent he sought at the academy, for Cain was the first female knight to reach master rank and connect, a prodigy with S-rank potential. Though fate had led her to serve Dalton first, he was glad they had reached this point. Looking up, Cain asked if she should now reveal her true identity and gender to everyone, but Raul gently shook his head and told her the choice was hers. Relieved, she said she wished to remain as she was as Cain, and Raul smiled, then brought the conversation back to the dungeon raid. After preparations, Raul's party reached the entrance of the ancient dungeon, where several knights who had escorted them stopped at the threshold and wished them luck. Raul nodded in gratitude and led his raid team forward. Josh, excited, said he was honored to be chosen and showed the magic lamp Raul had once left in his care. Raul chuckled and said he had brought something better, then summoned Raul the forest fairy, who cast a spell to light the dungeon with a warm green glow, filling the corridor with shimmering ancient magic. Everyone looked around in awe as Raul gestured for them to begin the raid. As they went deeper, a spectral blue wolf appeared and Cain thrust his spear with precision, but it passed through harmlessly. The wolf growled before vanishing, leaving Cain frustrated as he realized, just as Raul had said, that most monsters here were spirit types unaffected by physical attacks and that only psychic powers would work. Ahead, Raul extended his hand and struck down another spirit wolf with invisible force, then told Josh to touch the wall to his left. When Josh did, a hidden passage opened, glowing with mist, and Cain wondered how Raul could see through the dungeon's tricks so easily. Raul thought to himself that he knew because he had been here before in his past life when Janek's dungeon was the first he had ever cleared as an Esper, a labyrinth once thought impossible except for those with psychokinetic powers. Janek himself, once known as the Combat Master, had been an Esper, and his closest companion was the ancestor of House Greer. As the party pressed on, the path opened to a vast area with an enormous stone mansion under an enchanted sky, as though they had stepped outside. Josh gasped in confusion, but Raul confirmed it was still part of the dungeon and said it looked exactly as he remembered. Cain studied the stone walls and carvings that felt strangely familiar, while Josh pointed excitedly toward a large arena-like space where 2 towering statues faced each other, insisting that something was there. Cain followed Raul's gaze and froze, his breath catching as he saw a tall bronze statue with a design that could not be mistaken. The scene shifted to several days earlier in the meeting room of the Turium branch, where Raul had leaned back in his chair and said they should return to the topic of the dungeon raid. He had asked Cain if he had heard the rumors about the hidden treasure left behind by the ancestor of Marquis Greer in Janak's dungeon. Cain had nodded seriously and replied that most of the artifacts found in past expeditions were connected to House Greer, and the Marquis had tried many raids whenever the dungeon reappeared. But the cost was terrible, with few survivors. His voice had grown heavy as he added that the most recent attempt was 5 years ago, when his older brother Sean Greer, heir of their house, led an expedition after hearing of the dungeon's discovery at the academy. Sean had mobilized knights and soldiers but never returned. Clenching his fists, Cain had declared to his master that he must go for the sake of his brother and his family. Back in the present, Cain stood frozen before the bronze statue, and Raul asked him if the rumors could have been true. Cain stepped forward with a firm voice and said he was certain it was Jeremiah de Greer, the founder of the Greer Marquisate. The three of them approached together, but as they did, a glowing system window appeared in front of Raul, warning that it was a forced quest area, that unauthorized entry could mean death, and that the recommended qualifications included spear technique of rank B or higher, proficiency level 1 or above, and a bloodline connection to House Greer. Raul turned to Cain, gave him a confident nod, and asked if he could be trusted to handle it. To which Cain, eyes filled with determination, replied that his master could leave it to him. He stepped toward Jeremiah's statue, and as he entered the activation range, its eyes shone with light, its body moved with metallic echoes, and it swung its spear as a deep voice demanded to know who dared disturb its eternal sleep. Cain raised his spear and took a combat stance, declaring himself as Cain of the Greer Marquisate and requesting the founder's teachings. The statue chuckled darkly, saying it would not go easy and that Cain must prove his worth before lunging forward with impossible speed. Cain blocked furiously, his focus sharp on every movement, recognizing the legendary Greer technique known as Fury Wave and knowing he could not miss a single detail. While their clash echoed across the arena, Raul shifted his attention to a second statue, that of Janak, and smiled faintly, deciding to leave Cain to his trial while he faced his own. As Raul approached, another system window warned that it was a forced quest zone. Unauthorized entry could lead to death, and the requirements included combat skill rank B or higher at intermediate level +1, as well as psychic skill rank B or higher at intermediate level +1. Suddenly, Janak's statue glowed and cracked apart, awakening with a powerful voice asking who disturbed his slumber, his gaze falling on Raul and the tiny forest fairy rabble beside him. With a deep chuckle, Janak remarked at the sight of a fairy and a young psychic, saying he would reward them if they endured his trial and asking if Raul accepted. Raul confidently answered that he would, thinking of how in his past life he had barely survived with only intermediate level 3 telekinesis, but this time he was stronger. With a wave of his hand his psychic energy surged, and countless telekinetic swords formed in the air. Janak's eyes narrowed in surprise, noting the strength of Raul's intermediate psychokinesis. Though he scoffed aloud that numbers did not mean everything, Raul smiled faintly and said he looked forward to the duel. Janak lunged, his fist glowing with green martial aura, and Raul launched his blades. But Janak twisted through them with uncanny speed and struck at Raul. Raul formed a mana barrier, yet the fist pierced through as if it were nothing, landing squarely on Raul's torso and sending him staggering in pain. Realizing it was likely the advanced martial art penetration fist, Raul knew blocking would not work, only dodging. At that moment, Karl's spirit appeared from the Regnator armor, calmly noting the danger and asking how it felt to face such an opponent. Raul grimaced and admitted the man was tricky, his attacks cutting through defenses, and said dodging alone would not make this a real duel. Karl explained that against a master of penetration fist one must either deflect or stay out of range. Janak pressed forward again and Raul narrowly dodged 2 fierce blows, the second passing so close he felt the wind on his face. Janak smirked and said the warm-up was over and he would now show his true power, while Raul thought grimly that in his past life Janak had indeed been holding back. Janak had 2 psychic abilities, flame manipulation and body reinforcement, that increased both his attack and defense, and with his master-level martial arts he was one of the strongest duelists ever faced. Even so, when Janak launched another deadly strike, Raul used flicker to vanish and reappear in the air above him, where he formed a new ring of swords glowing with psychic energy. Believing that in aerial combat he held the advantage as a telekinetic, the blades rained down like meteors, but Janak met them with overwhelming force, flames erupting around his body as his aura flared, cracking and scorching the stone beneath him and raising the pressure in the room, which made Josh and Cain tense as they felt the change. Janak declared that numbers would not overwhelm him and claimed he would cut down junk like that, then swung his arm with explosive power to shatter many blades. Yet one of Raul's swords cut into his forearm and drew blood, making him realize in shock that they were mana blades, all imbued with energy, an unbelievable feat for a rookie. Enraged, Janak released a psychic pulse that forced the swords to collide and shatter into fragments, while Raul frowned, admitting to himself that his mana blades had been overpowered and needed reinforcement. Before he could act, Janak raised both hands, gathering flaming energy into a monstrous dragon of fire and aura that lunged like a comet, leaving Raul panicked, certain he could not dodge and would be burned no matter where he ran. until Carl appeared beside him, calm and steady, and told him to relax, open his eyes, and observe, saying the dragon was not real but condensed flame aura with a weak spot at the mana core. Raul focused and spotted the swirling orb of mana in the dragon's mouth, then summoned sharper and stronger blades, hurling them into the core and causing a massive explosion. Flames and smoke filled the air, but Raul emerged unharmed, leaving Janak staring in disbelief, admitting that Raul had reached a level he could no longer judge, conceding defeat and bowing his head. The statue of Janak spoke, saying he was glad to meet such an outstanding junior and could now rest in peace. Then a system chime announced the forced quest completion with rewards of a mansion warehouse key Type B, 50,000 player coins, a large amount of experience, and the title of the one who received Janak's acknowledgement. As Raul read the notification, a golden light shone from the statue's chest and a golden core floated out, with the statue's voice saying it looked forward to the day Raul's psychokinesis reached mastery and wishing that the gained experience would guide him, before falling silent and returning to lifeless stone. Jeremiah's statue also stopped mid-swing against Ken, conceding the match and telling him he had lasted longer than expected and passed the trial, while Josh cheered for both Raul and Ken. Another system notification repeated the quest rewards, and Raul smirked, satisfied that Ken had cleared his trial too. When they entered the mansion of Greer, Josh marveled at its grandeur while Raul told them to rest and said he would contact them later, and both Josh and Ken thanked him before leaving. Alone, Raul opened his system interface to sort through the rewards, noting that the title increased combat power, psychic strength, and skill proficiency by 20%. Though he thought a swordsmanship buff would have been nice. From his inventory he took out the Golden Core, an S-grade spiritual core of Janak that enhanced psychic abilities and granted unique powers based on choice, and was stunned, since in his previous life the best reward had only been grade B, with later ones being grade C. Without hesitation he swallowed it, golden light spreading through his body as the system announced he had consumed the core and must now choose 2 growth effects suited to his aptitude, revealing 3 new options including Psychokinesis Power Growth that increased the total movable weight by 10 times. Psychokinesis Control Growth increased the number of objects Raul could move by 10 times and improved his precision, while Psychokinesis Range Growth doubled both his detection and spirit projection range. His eyes widened as he realized he had to choose between them, and he thought it was insane. Taking a deep breath, he carefully analyzed each option. Power increased the weight he could move and the speed of heavy objects, control allowed him to handle more objects with precision, and range expanded his influence and detection. After a moment of thought he decided to select range growth and control growth. Golden light surged through his body and his eyes glowed brightly with gold as every object in the room floated in the air, spinning in perfect harmony under his will. He realized that the sensation was completely different from when he had reached master level in his past life and believed he could easily defeat his former self in a psychic duel. With a thought he placed everything neatly back, but then he sensed a faint, unusual aura and considered that just as he had received a hidden reward, Ken must have received one from Jeremiah, as the ring and spear he held seemed to show he had awakened his abilities. Raul smiled until Josh burst into the room, pale and breathless, reporting that there was a big problem. Raul turned sharply and asked what had happened, and Josh explained nervously that during his break while walking around the back of the mansion he had discovered a place that looked like a graveyard. Soon after, Raul, Ken, and Josh hurried to the mansion's rear grounds where the air was heavy and silence hung thick. As they turned the last corner, the sight of hundreds of human skeletons scattered across the ground made them tense. Raul's gaze swept over the grim scene and he told Ken in a low, grim voice that it was even worse than he expected and asked if Ken was searching for something in particular. Ken nodded solemnly, and Raul stepped forward, raising his hand as he decided to use the spiritual core's effect. An invisible wave pulsed outward, scanning the remains until his senses found a distinctive ring on the finger of a golden-armored knight's skeleton, which he recognized as the crest of Marquis Greer's house. As he stepped toward the corpse, Ken fell to his knees in despair while Josh approached with a bundle of weathered papers found beside the body. Raul read the faded but legible writing, which described how on September 7th the writer had heard from Fabian about Janak's dungeon and felt suspicious of the offer since they had never gotten along. On September 10th, Fabian of House McNeil claimed he wanted to make amends and proposed exploring the dungeon together without adults. On September 12th, the writer decided to go, believing waiting for family support would take too long. On September 15th, they entered the dungeon with escort knights and soldiers, and Fabian seemed cooperative, but by September 19th things went wrong, as the dungeon was filled with spiritual entities immune to physical attacks. On September 21st, the writer confessed betrayal as Fabian and his party disappeared overnight, and later the guide and priest were found dead, likely Fabian's doing. The entrance vanished, leaving only one knight with him, and he cursed the dungeon as he tried to escape. Raul lowered the papers, noting the rest was illegible and that the writer's mind was breaking. Ken rose, trembling with rage, his eyes burning red, while Raul reflected on Fabian of House McNeil, the spoiled late-born son of Marquis Clifford de McNeil, gifted a knight order despite his lack of talent. Raul thought the story sounded too much like his own and then expressed sympathy to Ken for the tragedy. But before he could continue, Ken cut him off, pledging loyalty to Raul and insisting he would not tarnish his master's name with personal vengeance, though he asked to be at the front if conflict with House McNeil arose. Raul promised him that chance, saying he must earn it with his own strength, and Ken bowed, vowing never to dishonor him. Raul then considered that killing Fabian would not be difficult, but that there was no rush, since conflict with House McNeil was inevitable, and he would repay them in full when the time came. In the weeks that followed, the dungeon expedition concluded, and Janak dungeon was relocated entirely to Calypso territory thanks to Raul's extraordinary reward. The Grade 10 Dungeon Core, which granted him administrative control over the ancient dungeon, including the ability to create or seal entrances anywhere. Though destroying the core would annihilate the dungeon, the existence of such cores was one of the world's most closely guarded secrets, and even Raul, once an intelligence operator, had never heard of them. Using the core, he salvaged all treasures from the dungeon and restructured it into his personal training ground. Guided by two ancient masters, even Bernard the Wind Mage used the power to raise his psychic abilities to a higher level. Raul then turned his attention to strengthening the knights and preparing his forces for the battles he knew were coming. A month later at the First Guild Academy, Dalton welcomed Raul warmly, saying it had been a long time since they last met, and Raul answered with a faint smile as he asked about the trainees. Dalton said he meant the foreigners and explained that their growth rate was astonishing, and now he understood why Raul was so interested in them. Dalton, who was both the headmaster and swordsmanship instructor, was personally in charge of their training. Raul then asked about the guild recruitment, and Dalton explained he had been focusing on talented individuals, though fewer people were interested than expected. Raul told him that was fine as long as Dalton secured the ones he had named, and Dalton replied that he would not take his future subordinates lightly. Raul then recalled a rare item he had obtained long ago, a special consumable from a main scenario quest that allowed him to create a second guild, bypassing the rule that a person could only join one. With this, he planned to form the Purple Guild, a secret player-only organization that would rival the First Guild in strength. Raul told Dalton he was counting on him and that he would give him most of the Purple Guild's authority. Dalton smirked and assured him to leave it to him, adding that the old lords would never imagine they were building such a thing in secret. And with that, Dalton left alone. Raul's form then shimmered and changed into the appearance of Bae DoHyun, and he said it was time to update that day's record. Later, a student from the academy rushed into a classroom flushed with excitement and announced that Bae DoHyun had appeared in Training Arena No. 1. The room immediately stirred, with one student exclaiming in surprise and another wondering how high he planned to push his score this time, while a third jumped up saying they should hurry to watch and might even get a chance for party play with him. It had already been 2 months since the academy's first batch of 600 students had enrolled, and they were improving rapidly under strict training methods. Among the many programs, the most famous was the academy's pride, the Illusion Magic Circle battles, which created complex combat environments filled with monsters to test real fighting ability. Each week, student performances were ranked, and the graduation exam would use the same system, making it essential training. But since its beginning, one thing never changed. The number 1 spot always belonged to Bae DoHyun, whose dominance was unmatched. In Arena 1, he fought with effortless precision, every strike clean and decisive, while outside, students gathered at the ranking display. One marveled that he had broken another record, another muttered in frustration. A third wondered how he kept achieving such scores despite rarely attending class, and a fourth replied that rumors said he was busy running missions for the First Guild. Soon, Bae DoHyun stepped out and students like Blake hurried to him, eagerly asking to spar. Before he could answer, another claimed they had booked him earlier, but Wang Tianming shoved through, declaring he would avenge his previous defeat. Bae DoHyun sighed and asked if they ever got tired of this, but Tianming smirked that he would never stop until he beat him, while Blake sharply reminded Tianming to wait his turn. The two argued until Bae DoHyun interrupted, saying they should try a 2-on-1. Shocked but excited, they accepted, only to be quickly defeated and left on the arena floor, admitting they had not even managed a single hit. Blake called Bae DoHyun a monster and said he was like an irregular, while Tianming swore he would defeat him someday. Blake then mentioned the Purple Guild, which was becoming popular among rankers and even being promoted by instructors. Tianming flatly said he was not interested, since he had already rejected all guild offers back in his home country, but Blake admitted he was thinking of joining since the conditions seemed excellent. He explained he wanted the best treatment in the best guild, and even if he started one himself, it would not surpass the one Bae DoHyun belonged to. He argued that once the academy ended, it would be difficult to meet him again, so if Tianming wanted to beat him one day, it might be wiser to join the same guild and wait for his chance. Tianming fell silent, imagining the day he could finally win, then asked Blake if he still had the guild brochure. Blake replied that he should already have one, but Tianming admitted he had thrown it away in anger after losing to Bae DoHyun. Blake told him to get another from the instructor and added that Tianming seriously needed to control his temper. Flustered, Tianming quickly told the other person to mind his own business. The scene then shifted to the First Guild's mirror branch, where a golden brown-haired guild member approached Raul with news that the business targeting outsiders was finally turning a profit. Raul smiled faintly and said that was good to hear, while the man explained they expected more newcomers and planned to expand the shop since they already had the manpower and funding. Raul assured him that if they needed anything, the guild would gladly cooperate, and the man expressed sincere gratitude for Raul's personal assistance. Suddenly, a system window appeared before Raul showing an incoming guild audio message, which he opened to hear Bernard urgently say that there was a problem and that their informant in Cofford Castle had reported Count Melvin's collapse. Raul's expression hardened and he cursed, asking if the scenario was beginning, then immediately activated emergency transmission to all guild members, ordering them to maintain maximum alert, treat the situation as wartime and prepare accordingly, to which they all replied in unison. Raul strode quickly down the corridor with knights at his sides, continuing his orders that all knights of the Mirror Branch were to head to Conferd's castle and that officer meetings would be held that night, instructing them to stand by until then. After cutting the transmission, he entered a room where Nakia, Dalton and Cain stood near an active portal and asked about the situation. Cain reported that the Count had not regained consciousness, but healers and priests had begun treatment, so Raul ordered Cain to follow him to the main estate and told Dalton to join Bernard at Conferd's castle with Nakia, which they both agreed to. Raul then gave Nakia a confidential order through secret transmission to her mind before telling Cain they would hurry to the main estate, while his own thoughts burned with determination as he recalled his vow upon awakening as Raul Ashton to accept this life and face anything, swearing to stop the tragedy looming over the Count's family no matter what. The scene then shifted to Conferd Castle, ancestral seat of House Ashton, where Raul entered through the main gates and urgently called out to Ivan. The trembling butler bowed and admitted he had failed to serve the Count properly, but Raul told him not to blame himself too much and said what mattered now was his father, asking to see him first. He signaled to Philip, a household retainer, who immediately stepped forward and led him toward the Count's chambers where armored knights stood guard with the family crest on their breastplates. Raul entered without speaking and saw Count Ashton unconscious on the bed with incense in the air, a healer and a priest tending him, and Lady Estella, wife of Raul's elder brother Dylan, weeping uncontrollably. With reddened eyes she turned to Raul and asked what they should do, but Raul did not answer immediately, instead sitting beside his father with clenched fists before asking the healer and priest what had happened. The priest hesitated before saying they did not know the exact cause, but the symptoms suggested mana backlash, which made Raul's eyes widen as he recalled that knights had a mana road in their bodies for mana flow, and when mana reversed it caused mana backlash, a usually fatal condition that left survivors permanently disabled. The priest explained that although the case was unusual, mana backlash was the only explanation, and Raul pressed to know if there was treatment, insisting they had to stabilize his father. The priest regretfully said divine power was ineffective and they could only offer blessings, and Raul nodded firmly, asking them to do everything they could. Later, when the others stepped back, Raul remained by the bed, and a shimmer from his armor revealed Carl, the spirit sealed within, who said the Count must be enduring immense pain. Raul quickly asked if there was no way to save him, and Carl requested to borrow the Count's senses. So Raul placed his hand on his father's head while Carl studied him, soon remarking that the condition did not match any mana backlash he had ever seen. Raul leaned in, asking if that meant there was a chance for treatment, but Carl warned it was complicated since the condition was highly unusual. He explained that by this mana level the Count should already be an intermediate master, but he had not broken through, and instead his own mana was clashing with the reverse mana in a stalemate he could not maintain forever. Carl outlined two possible approaches: first to identify and block the unnatural mana flow causing the backlash so the natural flow could recover, and second to forcefully block the reverse mana flow, which required a master-level manipulator with extreme precision and still carried enormous risk without any guarantee of stabilization. In either case, the worst outcome was unavoidable. Some time later, Raul walked through the castle corridor with Ivan, deep in thought, and asked why his eldest brother had not yet arrived. Ivan replied that a few days ago 2 teams had gone missing in a strange dungeon, so the eldest young lord had gone personally to investigate. Raul frowned, thinking it was no wonder the missing party had not answered the guild's messages, and he wondered whether anyone had sent word about returning. Ivan told him that of all places the dungeon was at the farthest edge of the Count's territory. Raul's expression sharpened as he asked about the Knight Commander and Viscount Ernest Basel. Ivan said the Knight Commander had gone into the dungeon with young Master Dylan and that Viscount Basel had been away for over a week conducting mobile training. Raul stopped in his tracks and asked who was overseeing the house and castle defenses right now. Ivan explained that the main estate was under Baron Carlo de Ashton, commander of the Silver Bear Knights, while the castle was guarded by Baron Dwayne de Ashton, head of the security forces. Raul muttered that this explained why the Silver Bears were on escort duty. He recalled that the county maintained 4 knight orders, the Golden Bear Knights, elite warriors serving directly under House Ashton; the Silver Bear Knights, mainly Ashton family members; the Iron Bear Knights, skilled fighters of common or foreign birth; and the Chain Knights, an order still in training. Although the Silver Bears were prestigious by name, they were considered weaker in combat than the Iron Bears. Raul made his decision and ordered a messenger to summon the Golden Bear Knights immediately, to fill any gaps with Chain Knights and to tell Baron Dwayne to lock down the castle so no one got in or out until further notice. Ivan acknowledged that he understood. As they moved, Raul's mind raced because the timing seemed too perfect. Everyone else assumed his father's collapse was an accident, but Raul did not. His brother and most forces were conveniently away, leaving the estate vulnerable, and without his informant in the main house he would have arrived too late. If his father had died, the county would have plunged into chaos. They had narrowly avoided disaster, and he needed to act now. He opened a private guild channel to issue rapid orders. He told Jake he would open a private portal to bring the knights and guild members to Conferd Castle, and he told Dalton to join them at the mansion with Nakia and Ken. All of them answered with unwavering obedience. Raul knew the enemy still did not understand the true power he and the First Guild held, and he resolved to use that ignorance to position his forces and quietly root out any treachery. Cain's voice then crackled through an audio message from the castle wall, reporting that 6 barony families bordering 4 of their lands were moving troops toward the borders with a significant force that included night orders. A slow, knowing smile formed on Raul's face as his resolve hardened. He decided he would show those rotten traitors what happened to backstabbers. The scene shifted to a secluded mansion where a silver-haired man greeted Viscount Jaden and apologized for the shabby place they had to meet in, but Jaden brushed the apology aside and asked about the situation. The man leaned closer and lowered his voice to report that their spy said the Count was on the verge of death and that most of the castle's main forces were away for a dungeon subjugation. A cold smile curved across Jaden's face as he thought the Count deserved it for bringing death on himself with foolish actions, and that Dylan had taken the bait too. The man assured him there was no one else who could rally the Count's forces, but then added that Raul Ashton had shown up at the mansion. Jaden's expression darkened because he thought Raul had become far too active after what happened in the capital. The silver-haired man quickly reassured him that they had stationed troops in Raul's territory so he would hurry back. Jaden replied that he had better, since they had paid a lot to move their pawns, and he ordered them to keep a close eye on Raul and report immediately. The man acknowledged. Jaden then turned to his assembled knights and told them they had waited long enough, that their great cause had finally begun, and that their crucial task was to set the Ashton line straight by driving out the vile ones who disrupted the family's order so they could rewrite Ashton's history with their own hands. The knights roared and raised their hands in unison while Jaden thought darkly that he would tear down the Count's line from top to bottom. Meanwhile at Conferred Castle, Raul made preparations. A senior Golden Bear Knight told him he could be counted on to carry out the task, which Raul inwardly agreed with because he considered the man the best choice due to his loyalty and strength. A day after his father's collapse, knights from nearby had returned, and Raul, after careful observation, entrusted his father's protection to Warren and his order. Then Baron Carlo, commander of the Silver Bear Knights, stepped forward to question whether this was an overreaction, and whether adding extra guards meant Raul did not trust the Silver Bear Knights. Raul met his gaze firmly and said it was not that he did not trust the Baron, only that he did not intend to trust anyone, and he would keep strengthening the guard until his brother returned. He hoped the Baron would understand. In his mind, Raul calculated that 5 Golden Bear Knights would rotate guard duty on the 5th floor where his father's room was and that no one might enter without his permission. The plot had begun within the house itself, and right now he could not trust anyone, so he must strengthen the guard even more. Later, Raul visited his father, Count Melvin Ashton, who was bedridden under the care of Bishop Alonso of the Xenon Order. He asked if there had been any improvement. Bishop Alonso apologized and admitted that merely maintaining the Count's current condition was already overwhelming for him. Raul looked at his father's fragile state for a long moment and then gently told the bishop that he had done well and asked him to step aside for a moment. The bishop bowed and left the room. Immediately Nikia entered and Raul quietly asked how it looked. After carefully observing the Count, Nikia nodded and said she thought Raul's guess was correct and that it was definitely a case of monofilaria. Raul's heart sank as he recalled that in his previous life he had seen monofilaria before. He knew it had been used to assassinate key figures in the kingdom, sparking a great bloodbath whose exact cause had never been uncovered. He had always suspected it was connected to the downfall of the Count's line. He asked whether treatment was possible, and Nikia replied that based on the data Raul had given her, she had already developed a cure and that treating the monofilaria itself would not be a problem, but she could not guarantee what the Count's condition would be after treatment, although she would do her best. Raul said he was counting on her, and that if it was Nikia, he believed she could do it, and Nikia bowed and left while Raul thought grimly about catching those who had caused the mess. Sometime later, Raul met with Philip and asked whether forces had been spotted at the Calypse border, and Philip confirmed that they had and that the force seemed to be made up of a private knight order and mercenaries, with no official report yet, but given the scale there was a real possibility of a territorial war. Raul pressed that they would need royal approval to declare war, and Philip warned that the enemy had already completed deployment and could declare war at any moment, so time was of the essence. Raul decided they should return to the territory and inform the commanders of each domain about the movements in neighboring lands and have all night orders prepared for combat, which Philip confirmed they would do, while unknown to them a figure cloaked in black observed from the shadows nearby and smiled maniacally at what he had overheard. Later that night 2 Silver Bear Knights guarded the mansion in uneasy silence, and when one of them whispered that he thought he had heard something, a dagger suddenly pierced his neck and blood spurted as his body collapsed. The second knight was struck down in the same way when another dagger buried itself in his throat, and the killer stepped from the shadows and identified himself as Imperial Hound 6, sneering that the security was lax. At that moment one of his subordinates hurried out from the mansion and reported that as promised, all the windows were open. Imperial Hound 6 coldly ordered his men to move to designated spots and await his signal, telling them that once they saw it, they were to kill everyone and burn everything. His men obeyed and scattered, and Imperial Hound 6 smiled maniacally as he said he had been waiting decades for this day and vowed to snuff out the last breath of Count Ashton's line with his own hands. The mansion windows stood wide open while the 2 Silver Bear Knights nearby remained oblivious to the danger creeping in from the shadows. and when a red flare burst with ominous light, one of the knights turned toward it in confusion, and a dagger shot from an open window pierced his head, killing him instantly. The surviving knight gasped, but a cloaked figure appeared behind him, covered his mouth and drove a dagger deep into his throat, ending his life as well. The assassins moved quickly, two of them slipping into the room where Dylan's wife Lady Estella lay sleeping. The sound of footsteps woke her, and before she could react, a handkerchief soaked with a drowsy chemical was pressed over her mouth. She struggled desperately, then her body went limp and she fell into an enchanted sleep. The Imperial Hounds carried her to their leader, Imperial Hound 6, whose cold eyes scanned her as he asked whether she was the right target. One of the kidnappers confirmed there was no doubt, and Imperial Hound 6 laughed low and satisfied, saying everything was going smoothly, and that starting that night the Count's house would walk the path of ruin. At his order, a subordinate slung Lady Estella over his shoulder and leapt from the window, carrying her away into the night. Imperial Hound 6 lingered to watch the chaos below, saying things were going so well that he might watch a little longer and that it should be about time for the signal. And his anticipation was rewarded when flames erupted across the mansion as another flare burst in the sky. The Silver Bear Knights finally realized they were under attack and shouted that the enemy had come, but the defenders were outmatched as the Imperial Hounds carved through them with merciless precision, moving faster and striking harder than the knights could withstand, while fire spread rapidly through the halls and smoke twisted into the night sky. Imperial Hound 6 smiled faintly and turned down a corridor, saying that the chaos was enough and that they should head to the next target. But when he pushed open another chamber's door, he was met by the sharp metallic tang of blood. He rebuked his subordinates for failing to keep the target under control and for harming the target, and before his fury could settle, a blade sliced through the air toward him. He leapt back instinctively and dodged the strike, and what he saw froze him. 3 of his men lay lifeless on the ground, and Philip stood above them, his sword gleaming in the firelight, forcing Imperial Hound 6 to ask whether there had been such an order. Philip asked coldly as he lowered his blade into a ready stance, but Imperial Hound 6 thought he had not heard it. 6 narrowed his eyes and cursed inwardly, thinking that he had believed the man had gone back with Raul. Realizing something was wrong and deciding to retreat for now, he spun around and fled through the smoke-filled corridors, glancing back to see Philip had not pursued, which brought him relief as he realized Philip's main concern was protecting the target. He concluded Raul must have secretly kept hidden troops and called him a fool, yet he still believed their side would claim victory that night. Later in a meeting room, tension boiled over when Warren, a Golden Bear Knight, slammed his fist on the table and demanded to know how such a disaster had been allowed. Baron Carlo, commander of the Silver Bear Knights, snapped back that it was not only their fault since inner and outer security had been Warren's duty, and Warren retorted that the matter would be investigated and responsibility taken. Carlo snarled that if his fallen knights were insulted he would not remain quiet. Before the argument could worsen, Philip's sharp voice cut through the room as he ordered them to stop, and silence followed. Philip then turned to a Silver Bear Knight and demanded a report, and the knight bowed, explaining that 30 guards and 5 Silver Bear Knights had been killed in the attack. 1 annex had burned down, half the East Garden was destroyed, the main building was badly damaged, and Lady Estella had been kidnapped. Carlo froze in shock, while Warren bitterly muttered that he had no face to see the Count or young Lord Dylan, and Philip, calm but with hardened eyes, asked about the kidnappers' trail. The knight admitted their tracks had been hard to follow once they left the inner castle, and Philip nodded grimly, saying they would do what they could, explaining that he had ordered the guard captain to seal the gates right after the incident so the attackers should still be inside the castle. He instructed Warren to guard the Count with utmost care, and Warren agreed, then turned to Carlo and told him to secure the mansion again since remnants might still be hidden, noting that the attackers had smashed the outer portal to prevent the Count's main forces from returning, warning of another possible attack and urging vigilance. The meeting ended, and as the knights dispersed, Philip stepped aside and opened a private guild channel, reporting to his master that he had carried out the orders. And Raul's voice answered from the shadows, praising his work and declaring that soon the real prey would take the bait and that it was time to deal with the rats. The scene shifted to a lantern-lit military tent where Viscount Jaden studied reports and maps until Baron Tate burst in, breathless with news that Dylan Ashton and the Golden Bear Knights had returned from the dungeon. Jaden looked up sharply and asked about the enemies, and Tate spread a map, pointing out that the commander-in-chief and the Central Army were retreating from the Forbidden Zone's border and would need 5 days to return since the portal was destroyed, while their own forces were east of Conferred Castle in Baron Bennett's territory and could reach it in 2 days with cavalry. Jaden studied the map and asked about the troop situation in Conferred Castle, noting that its size made it difficult to attack, and Tate reported that 5,000 guard troops, 60 elite knights and about 100 chain knights defended it. Jaden considered that they had only about 1,500 elite troops, so taking the castle quickly would not be easy, but he added that even if things went badly, the hostages they held would serve their purpose. Tate smiled thinly, remarking on the captives taken right under the Count's nose and praising their collaborators. But Jaden said coldly it had not been difficult since the current Count was unfit, and Tate agreed, saying the Count was too soft and that Jaden's decisiveness was needed. Jaden rose and left the tent where his knights awaited, and at his signal a horn was blown, after which he raised his hand and declared that all troops would march immediately on Conferred Castle. The story then shifted to the riverside where Dylan and the Golden Bear Knights rested, letting their horses drink and loosening their armor in silence. Trevor de Hesse, commander of the Golden Bear Knights, approached Dylan at the water's edge and asked if he felt better. Dylan sighed heavily and admitted he was still frustrated, saying he should have judged more carefully, but Trevor gently told him it was not his fault, admitting he too had not been deceived so badly in a long time. Dylan's jaw tightened as he recalled the reports of a strange dungeon and missing soldiers, explaining that with procedures in place and traces of demons reported, he and the First Night Order had no choice but to act, only to find the dungeon empty, with no beasts or demons, just a trap. And he ground his teeth as he remembered being fooled both during the Royal Capital Rebellion and now again. Trevor broke his thoughts by asking where he planned to go, and Dylan replied that after leaving the dungeon he had heard everything from Raul, who had given him two options. One path led straight to Conferred Castle to rally troops, while the other led to somewhere else they needed to visit first, and Dylan decided they would take that road. Trevor nodded without hesitation and agreed. Dylan in a quieter tone asked what Trevor thought of Raul. Trevor considered and explained that before the Count went into seclusion he had once spoken about Raul, blaming himself for not realizing Raul's true nature, thinking Raul was a child to be protected for life. But Raul had been too exceptional for the Count's household to contain. Dylan turned sharply. His father said that Trevor had sighed, and he thought that if Raul had been only moderately gifted his father would have warned caution. But Raul did not covet the Count's seat, and dangerous as it sounded had the talent to raise a nation. So the Count had said Raul was far too great for one house alone, which made a faint smile cross Dylan's face as he wondered when Raul had even won over the commander. Then he straightened with resolve burning in his eyes and told his men to move, saying those who dared betray the Count's house must pay the price. He mounted his horse and ordered his knights to move out again, to leave anyone who fell behind and to stay sharp and keep up. The Golden Bear Knights rallied, ready to follow. Far away, deep in an Imperial Hound hideout, Imperial Hound 6 returned with his subordinates after their mission. His teeth clenched, he surveyed the surviving troops and thought the last operation had caused more damage than expected, and that Raul had left behind variables deadlier than they had imagined. But he told himself it did not matter, because no matter who survived the result would not change. The Ashtons would tear each other apart until only one remained, and that would be the perfect moment to cut off the Count family's last breath. From the shadows above he watched the Empire's Mana soldiers with grim satisfaction and stood in the underground chamber calm but calculating, wondering if they should have deployed the cavalry earlier, then deciding they must not reveal themselves yet. Whether Baron Jaden seized Conferred Castle no longer mattered. Once the battle began, their agent would neutralize the castle's magical defenses, and they would open the portal beneath the chamber to unleash reinforcements and cavalry inside the castle walls, saving the cavalry until the end for the bloody festival he could hardly wait to see. His thoughts were broken when a subordinate rushed in, shouting that the captive they had taken from the Count's family had escaped. Imperial Hound 6's eyes widened in shock, and he scolded the guards for failing to watch one woman and ordered a quick search of the underground. But before the search began, a voice behind him apologized for being called just some woman. When he spun around, he saw Lady Estella standing there with cold fire in her eyes, and in an instant she struck, killing the subordinate beside him. The captain barked that an escaped prisoner had appeared and to catch her. Two men lunged with blades flashing, but she moved with deadly skill and cut them down before they could react, their bodies falling lifeless to the ground. Imperial Hound 6 froze, his heart pounding because that movement was not ordinary. Her form began to waver until a disguise collapsed and a mocking voice filled the chamber, revealing that the bronze mask had been removed and that it was not Lady Estella at all, but Cain, whose eyes burned with vengeance as he declared that he would repay the deaths of his men in full. Imperial Hound 6's composure cracked because he realized Cain must be the master of the Wings of Freedom Information Guild, and that Cain had disguised himself as a target for this moment. Cain sneered that it was exactly the filthy trick his enemies used, taunting them for being burned by their own games, which enraged Imperial Hound 6 and made him roar that this was the Imperial Hound's den and they should not expect to leave alive. Several subordinates rushed forward with weapons drawn. Cain leapt into the air and his daggers flashed, spinning like deadly comets to strike enemies in head and shoulder, killing some instantly, while leaving others screaming and grievously wounded. The captain lunged and slashed with his dagger, but Cain met the strike and locked blades with him. The captain snarled that charging into enemy territory so recklessly had its limits, and that because Cain had seen everything he could not be left alive. Their blades clashed, sparks bursting into the dark chamber as more Imperial Hounds swarmed in, and Cain only smiled coldly and taunted that they had all crawled out. Before the clash could continue, the ground shook violently, and an explosion erupted at the entrance, smoke and fire blasting into the chamber. From the haze a voice thundered orders to wipe out every last one and leave no survivors. As Raul Ashton emerged with his knights, their weapons gleaming, and they surged forward, cutting down Imperial Hounds and Empire Mana soldiers alike. Imperial Hound 6's eyes widened in disbelief, and he demanded to know how Raul was there and whether he had returned to his territory. Raul regarded him calmly and asked if he must be the one in charge of the tunnel, wondering if the Empire had a mole unit and how they always managed to dig these underground tunnels. Imperial Hound 6 ground his teeth because he saw hundreds of cavalry, over 100 enhanced soldiers and Imperial knights being completely overwhelmed, and he could not understand when Raul had gathered such a force. Raul's eyes followed the battlefield with pride as he thought that for the past 6 months he had been recruiting talent using the developer's analysis, and with the system's aid they had conquered gates and trained without rest until one by one they rose to expert-class knights. All that effort was finally bearing fruit. Still, as the slaughter continued, Imperial Hound 6's expression twisted in desperation because his plan 10 years in the making was falling apart. He roared that he could not give up and summoned his full strength. So a torrent of red aura burst from his body, flooding the chamber with murderous heat. For the glory of the Emperor, he unleashed that power, which made Raul narrow his eyes in recognition and with a hint of surprise. Note that the technique was the Black Sacrifice.